Tonight, as the cold New England wind moves softly through the dark streets of old Boston, we travel back to the spring of 1775, a time before electricity, before automobiles, before the United States even existed. And yet, hidden inside one quiet night, was a mystery Americans still argue about today. Did Paul Revere truly shout, "The British are coming"? Did he really ride alone through the darkness, warning the countryside? Or has the real story slowly disappeared beneath 2 centuries of legend? As you relax tonight and settle deeper into your pillow, we will drift slowly into Colonial Massachusetts, into muddy roads, salt-filled harbor air, dim lantern light, and the uncertain silence before revolution. And somewhere above the sleeping town of Boston, 2 lanterns waited in the steeple of the Old North Church, one if by land, two if by sea. But what did Paul Revere actually see that night? Let us begin slowly. In April of 1775, Boston was not the shining modern city Americans know today. It was smaller, quieter, colder. The town rested beside the dark waters of Massachusetts Bay, connected by narrow dirt roads and surrounded by farms, marshlands, and forests of elm and pine. At night, Boston smelled of seawater, chimney smoke, horse sweat, and wet wood. The spring air in New England could still feel bitterly cold after sunset. Winds drifted in from the Atlantic Ocean, carrying moisture and fog across the harbor. The streets themselves were uneven and muddy. Many roads were little more than wagon tracks, worn into the earth by years of horses and carts. Lantern light flickered weakly from taverns and windows, and above it all stood church steeples rising into the darkness, including the tall steeple of Christ Church. Today, Americans know it as the Old North Church. On the evening of April 18th, 1775, tension covered Boston like a heavy blanket. British soldiers occupied the town. For years, relations between the colonies and the British Crown had worsened. Taxes, protests, boycotts. The Boston Tea Party had taken place only 16 months earlier. Now rumors spread through taverns and meeting houses that British troops planned to march into the Massachusetts countryside. Their mission was believed to be simple: seize colonial weapons, arrest patriot leaders, end resistance before it grew stronger. But Boston itself was filled with spies, watchers, and silent observers. Patriot networks moved carefully through the town. Among them was a silversmith named Paul Revere. By day, Revere was respected for his metal work, but at night, he carried messages through hidden political circles. He was not alone. Many ordinary colonists quietly exchanged information about British troop movements. Merchants, printers, stable boys, sailors. The city whispered constantly. And on that chilly April evening, something unusual was happening near the harbor. British boats were being prepared. Officers moved with unusual purpose. Soldiers gathered equipment. The silence itself seemed suspicious. Paul Revere had been warned that British troops might leave Boston that very night. But there was uncertainty. Would they march out by land across Boston Neck? Or would they cross the Charles River by boat? The answer mattered greatly. Patriot riders outside Boston needed to know which route the soldiers would take. So, Revere arranged a simple signal, lanterns in the church tower. If the British moved by land, 1 lantern would shine. If they crossed the river by sea, 2 lanterns would appear. Simple, quiet, visible across the dark water. As the evening deepened, Boston became colder. The harbor waters reflected faint moonlight beneath drifting clouds. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly in the distance. Most citizens slept unaware that history was moving around them. Inside Old North Church, trusted patriots prepared the lanterns. The church itself stood in Boston's North End neighborhood, surrounded by twisting colonial streets and wooden homes pressed close together. Its tall steeple rose above the rooftops like a dark needle against the sky. Climbing into the steeple at night was not easy. The wooden stairs creaked. The air smelled of old timber, dust, wax, and salt carried inland from the harbor. Outside, British patrols still moved through the town. Discovery could mean arrest, or worse. And then, shortly after 10 p.m., two lanterns appeared, tiny lights glowing against the darkness, to if by sea. Across the Charles River, watchers saw the signal. The British were crossing by boat. Even now, more than 250 years later, historians debate parts of the story. Who exactly hung the lanterns? How long did they remain visible? Did British officers notice them? The famous phrase itself, one if by land, two if by sea, became immortal largely because of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem written nearly 90 years later. But real history is often quieter than poetry, less dramatic, more human. Paul Revere himself likely never shouted, "The British are coming." After all, many colonists still considered themselves British, and yelling through sleeping villages would have immediately attracted patrols. Instead, the riders moved carefully, quietly, urgently. Soon after the signal appeared, Paul Revere crossed the Charles River by boat. The waters were dark and cold beneath him. The moonlight shimmered weakly against small waves. Some historians believe British naval ships sat nearby in the harbor, creating dangerous obstacles for anyone trying to cross unnoticed. Imagine the silence of that crossing. Only the sound of water touching wood, distant creaking from ships, the soft splash of oars, cold spring air against the face. On the opposite shore, Revere borrowed a horse and began his ride westward into the Massachusetts countryside. The geography of colonial Massachusetts shaped everything that night. The roads were rough and winding. Stone walls divided farmland, swamps, and forests covered much of the land between villages. In April, the ground remained damp from melting winter snow. Horse hooves struck mud, gravel, and frozen earth as Revere rode through the darkness. He traveled through towns like Charlestown, Medford, and Lexington, small settlements connected by narrow country roads. Many homes still glowed faintly with fireplace light behind shuttered windows. Dogs barked as riders passed. Farm animals shifted inside barns. The night carried the smell of wet grass and wood smoke. Other riders joined the warning effort too. William Dawes, Samuel Prescott. The story was never only about one man, it was a network, a chain of messengers spreading alarm quietly across the countryside. And all the while, British troops continued their movement. Roughly 700 soldiers under Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith crossed the Charles River from Boston toward Cambridge. Heavy wool uniforms brushed against equipment. Boots pressed into muddy roads. Metal bayonets reflected moonlight. The march itself was exhausting. New England roads were uneven and difficult even during daylight. At night, under uncertain skies, the journey became slower and more dangerous. The countryside around Lexington was peaceful then. Rolling farmland, small orchards, wooden fences, meeting houses standing silently beneath the stars. No one yet knew exactly what would happen when the soldiers arrived. The coming battles at Lexington and Concord would eventually become legendary. But during those quiet hours before dawn, Fear and uncertainty ruled everything. Some families awoke suddenly to hurried knocks on doors. Others listened to whispers passing from house to house. Militia members gathered muskets and powder from hidden locations. Candles flickered in kitchen windows. Horses were saddled quickly in the cold darkness. And still, above Boston Harbor, the memory of those two lanterns lingered. A small signal, brief, almost fragile, yet powerful enough to echo through American history forever. Today, millions of Americans learn about Paul Revere in school textbooks. But the reality of that night was not polished or heroic in the way movies sometimes portray it. It was confusing, cold, messy, filled with incomplete information and nervous decisions. The writers were not certain what would happen. The colonists did not know war was truly beginning. Even the famous signal itself was only one small part of a much larger communication network built through trust, secrecy, and local knowledge. And perhaps that is what makes the story feel so human even now. Not perfection, but uncertainty. Ordinary people trying to act during extraordinary times. As dawn slowly approached on April 19th, pale light began touching the Massachusetts countryside. Fog drifted over fields. Birdsong returned gradually to the forests. And somewhere behind them, the road back toward Boston stretched quietly through the morning mist. The lanterns in the old North Church were long extinguished by then, but their glow remained alive in memory. Two small lights against the darkness, seen for only a moment, yet remembered for centuries. And tonight, as modern cities hum softly outside your own window, perhaps it is peaceful to imagine that older world for a little while longer. A colder world, a quieter world, a world of candlelight, muddy roads, harbor winds, and distant church bells beneath the skies of colonial New England. And somewhere in the darkness, a rider disappearing slowly down the road.